The story begins under the restless glow of our star, a place where storms of light twist and churn in slow and colossal spirals, and it is within this shimmering chaos that a visitor from the deep dark between the stars has just performed a passing dance that has left astronomers around the world unsettled in a way that few celestial events ever have. They watched as the object known as 3I Atlas swept past the Sun, and the instruments that captured fragments of its behaviour revealed changes so unusual that many scientists found themselves whispering the question that no one in the scientific community ever wishes to say aloud unless they truly must. What exactly are we looking at? 3I Atlas has challenged every expectation placed upon it, and from the very first moment of its appearance, it has refused to behave in a manner that resembles any comet known to humankind. The early data made it look like a quiet wanderer, a harmless speck drifting inward from the vast unknown. But the closer it came to our Sun, the more the truth began to unravel, revealing a series of transformations that have turned a simple astronomical curiosity into one of the most baffling interstellar enigmas ever detected. In the earliest recordings, astronomers noticed a faint point of light moving steadily inwards, nothing more than a drifting ember carried by the invisible winds of gravity. And for a brief time there seemed to be nothing worth noting beyond its origins outside the solar system. But then the encounter happened, the moment when 3I Atlas slipped into the fiery domain just above the Sun's blazing surface. And it was at this moment that the object demonstrated a character that shifted from ordinary to extraordinary with startling speed. As it passed through the region of intense solar radiation, researchers witnessed phenomena that forced them to re-evaluate everything they believed they understood about the physics of interstellar comets. The simple question of whether 3I Atlas is a comet at all became almost impossible to answer with confidence. If this is a comet, then it continues to be the strangest comet ever observed. And if it is not, then the world is about to discover the truth soon. Because 3I Atlas is continuing its journey and is now heading in our direction. There is a special electricity in the air when the unknown appears against the familiar backdrop of the Sun. Space is a realm where nearly everything behaves according to the laws we have carved over centuries of inquiry, and yet every so often something arrives that forces us to wonder if those laws truly cover every corner of the cosmos. 3I Atlas has emerged from the powerless quiet of interstellar space with a kind of silent defiance, presenting characteristics so contradictory that scientists have begun stacking questions faster than they can answer them. How did this object survive the unimaginably long voyage between the stars without fragmenting? Why has its surface shimmered in colours that shift in defiance of thermal expectations? Why has its brightness surged with an intensity that exceeds by several factors what natural outgassing should ever be able to produce? And most unsettling of all, why did it begin to accelerate in a manner that suggests a force acting from within? These questions are the sparks that light the fire of our curiosity, and they are why the story of 3I Atlas has spread beyond observatories into living rooms and conversations around the world. There is a silent thrill in witnessing something that challenges the boundaries of what we know. Humanity has always been drawn to mysteries that emerge from the night sky, and tonight, you and I stand at the beginning of one of the most unusual cosmic stories of our time. But before we begin opening the layers of this strange and wandering traveller, before we journey into the ultraviolet storms of the Sun and the shifting colours of a visitor from far beyond our planets, I want to pause for a moment and ask you something. You are here with me, listening to this unfolding tale of a lone interstellar voyager, and I am genuinely curious about the place where you find yourself right now. Before we dive into the heart of the mystery, tell me in your mind where you are listening from. Are you somewhere warm and quiet, or beneath a cold sky filled with city lights? Perhaps you're on the other side of the world where the day is just beginning. Or maybe the night has already stretched long and deep around you. What time is it where you are? Is it early enough that the world around you still hums with life, or late enough that the streets outside lie silent and still? I am always fascinated by the thought that people from every corner of the planet might be hearing these words at their own unique moments, each with their own surroundings, moods, and thoughts. The idea that you are out there, somewhere on the map of this round and restless world, sharing this moment of curiosity with me, brings a quiet sense of connection that I value deeply. Whether you're resting on a couch, lying in bed, commuting late at night, or even working through the quiet hours, I want you to know that I am grateful you are here. This story is one worth experiencing slowly, with wonder and focus, and I'm glad to be sharing it with you. So now, settle in, allow your thoughts to gather gently, and prepare to follow me through one of the most intriguing and mind-bending celestial mysteries of our era. Because the strange tale of Three-Eye Atlas is only just beginning, and what awaits us as we move deeper is far more extraordinary than anything that greeted us at the start. The story of Three-Eye Atlas cannot be separated from the larger drama unfolding across our solar system, for the object has arrived during a moment when the sun itself is roaring through one of its most intense phases. Astronomers note with a mixture of excitement and disbelief that there is a very interesting coincidence, because our sun is experiencing its peak activity, a period known as the solar maximum, and it is within this rare and radiant cycle that the interstellar visitor has chosen to appear. The solar maximum is not a quiet season. It is a time when the surface of our star is transformed into a shifting tapestry of luminous storms, when magnetic fields writhe like living serpents, and when the sun casts off great waves of energy with a force that can reach from one end of the solar system to the other. Under the overpowering light of this cycle, the sun becomes a creature of fire and turbulence. Sunspots bloom like dark bruises across its surface, each one a doorway into deeper magnetic tension. Solar flares erupt with sudden brilliance, sending pulses of radiation out into the cosmic sea. Even more dramatic are the coronal mass ejections, immense clouds of charged particles that peel away from the sun in slow yet massive arcs, drifting outward with an energy that can rattle the magnetic shields of distant worlds. These ejections are the solar equivalent of tempests, great luminous storms that sweep across the void and remind every planet in their path that the star at the center is a living force, restless and unpredictable. On Earth, the consequences of this radiant fury reveal themselves in the night skies. People living across northern lands have looked up to find the heavens draped in colours more vivid than they have seen in many years, and the auroras have become so bright and so vibrant that even those unaccustomed to looking skyward have paused to marvel. The lights have unfurled over the frozen lakes of northern Canada, where the reflections shimmer and ripple across the ice like ribbons of liquid jade. They have danced above the forests of Scandinavia, curling into spirals of emerald and violet that seem alive with breath. Across the sweeping tundra of Siberia, faint hints of crimson have washed across the cold horizon. Even in places far from the poles, where auroras rarely visit, faint glimmers have surprised those awake in the deepest hours of the night. What people are witnessing in those skies are, in a sense, pieces of the sun bouncing off our atmosphere. Charged particles launched from the solar surface travel across millions upon millions of kilometers before crashing gently against Earth's magnetic field and spiraling into the upper atmosphere. There they collide with atoms of oxygen and nitrogen, prompting them to release soft glowing light, and this light paints the sky in sweeping curtains of green, purple, red, and sometimes even blue. It is as though the sun itself has reached out across space to lay its luminous fingers upon our planet, and it is during this magnificent, volatile season that Three-Eye Atlas has made its entrance. So we are just coming off of the peak right now, and this is when Three-Eye Atlas makes its approach. The timing is astonishing. It is the right moment, the right cycle, the right chapter of the solar rhythm, and humanity just happens to be watching with instruments more sensitive than any we have ever possessed. Our telescopes, our satellites, our solar observatories, all are tuned to monitor the behaviour of the sun during this period, and because of that, they have inadvertently become witnesses to one of the most enigmatic visitors the solar system has ever received. There is something almost fated about the convergence of these two events, as though the swelling pulse of the sun and the quiet trajectory of an interstellar traveller have aligned in a way that defies chance. The solar maximum has stripped away any illusion of calm and has laid bare the universe in a heightened state of brilliance and motion, and into this arena of fire and light steps Three-Eye Atlas. Had it arrived a few years earlier or a few years later, we might have missed the clues that only the glare of a raging sun could reveal. Instead, it has chosen a moment when the star is able to test every particle of its surface and expose secrets that would otherwise remain hidden. It is within this stormlit backdrop that our story continues, and as we move forward, it becomes clear that the timing of its appearance is not merely fortunate for observers, but essential to the mystery itself, for the intense energy of the solar maximum has not only illuminated 3i Atlas, it has awakened it, revealing behaviours that seem almost impossible, and the deeper we look, the stranger the story becomes. As the strange visitor from beyond our solar system continued its descent toward the inner realm of the planets, a moment approached that astronomers had anticipated with equal measures of excitement and apprehension, for they knew that the passage through perihelion would test the object in ways nothing else could. We call this phase perihelion, the point at which the distance between the object and the sun is at its shortest, a moment when the surface of the traveller becomes the stage upon which heat and radiation and coronal mass ejections unleash their full force. To imagine this moment is to imagine a scene carved from the most spectacular visions of cinema, a place where the sky itself glows with liquid fire. If one could stand near that region of space and witness the encounter with human eyes, the sight would be overwhelming. The colours alone would be beyond earthly experience, a kaleidoscope of golds and scarlets and fierce whites that ripple and curl through the solar atmosphere. The sound, though space is silent, would exist in vibrations that rattle through every atom of your body, the silent thunder of plasma waves smashing against the magnetic fields that surround the sun. You would feel the invisible force of radiation like a tide pushing against your skin, a relentless pressure that no living creature could endure for even a moment. Wherever you turned, arcs of light would flare outward like molten whips, and the radiant heat would be so violent that metal would vaporize before it ever had the chance to glow. Into this inferno drifted the small shape of 3i Atlas, a visitor that had spent untold ages wandering the frozen emptiness between the stars. Now, for the first time in perhaps millions or billions of years, it brushed against the outer breath of a living star, and in doing so, revealed clues that no telescope from Earth could have extracted before. As the object approached the zone of greatest pressure, telescopes and solar observatories from across the solar system turned their gaze toward the unfolding spectacle, hoping that this rare moment would give them the clarity they had been searching for. A spacecraft orbiting Mars offered one of the earliest opportunities for a close look. It had passed within what would be, on a cosmic scale, a modest distance from the interstellar traveller, and astronomers waited in hushed expectation as the images were transmitted back across the void. They hoped for clarity, for texture, for perhaps even the first proper glimpse of what the object truly looked like beneath its surrounding haze of gas and dust. Instead, when the highest resolution photograph ever to be taken of 3i Atlas finally appeared on screens, they were met with something that prompted both bafflement and a small, reluctant smile. It was simply a big fuzzy white dot. The hopes had been high, and the anticipation had grown with every hour, and yet the grand reveal was little more than a glowing blur against the dark. The image carried a sort of cosmic humour, as though the universe itself had momentarily turned playful, reminding everyone that some secrets are not surrendered easily. But disappointment did not last long, because even as the Mars orbiter revealed little, the eyes of other instruments were seeing far more. Closer to the Sun, a series of coronagraphs aboard satellites designed to stare directly into the solar atmosphere were recording changes that the human eye could never perceive. While the Mars camera showed only a pale, formless smudge, the coronagraphs traced the outlining glow that surrounded 3i Atlas as it drew into the brightest and harshest light of its journey. In those final moments before perihelion, the object was exposed to a bombardment unlike anything it had ever encountered in its long life. Streams of charged particles hammered into it, waves of ultraviolet radiation wrapped around it. The solar wind surged past it with enough force to blow entire atmospheres from planets. Under such unimaginable conditions, the object should have shown signs of stress, cracking, fragmenting, breaking into the pieces that scientists would normally expect from a natural comet passing too close to the Sun. Instead, something else began to happen. Something that would later become one of the defining mysteries of its passage. 3i Atlas began to change, not in a faint or subtle way, but in a manner so dramatic that even the most seasoned researchers found themselves leaning closer to their monitors, trying to understand what forces could shape such an extraordinary transformation. Though the Mars orbiter had given us almost nothing to work with, the chronographs were recording the first signs of what the solar maximum was pulling from the visitor. In the brightness of the solar fire, in the chaotic glow of the corona, The interstellar traveller began to reveal its true nature, and as we prepare to explore the next chapter of its story, we find that the perihelion was not an end, but a beginning, a doorway into the deeper mysteries that 3i Atlas carried with it from the space between the stars. As 3i Atlas pulled itself past the furnace of the sun and began drifting outward along the arc of its strange and uncharted path, astronomers across the solar system anticipated that the most dramatic part of its journey might already have passed. The moment of closest approach had come and gone. The immense punishment of solar radiation had been endured, and many believed that what followed would be the slow, cooling and quiet fading typical of a comet, recovering from its confrontation with the star. Yet just as the collective breath of the scientific world began to settle, the unexpected happened, sudden and luminous, in a way that felt almost theatrical, as though the universe had chosen this exact moment to deliver its first true twist in the story. Instruments watching from afar recorded a sudden change, small at first, barely perceptible against the steady brilliance of the solar corona, but then the numbers rose again, and again, accelerating in a curve that made no physical sense. At first, no one reacted. Tiny fluctuations in brightness are common when comets interact with the solar wind, and most observers assumed this was nothing more than a typical flare of reflected light. But the curve continued its climb, the faint glow becoming sharper, stronger, more radiant. Within hours, the object was becoming about 400 times brighter than it had been just days before, a level of luminosity that far exceeded the expectations of even the most optimistic models. A typical comet passing near the sun might brighten somewhere between 10 and 100 times, depending on its composition and the intensity of the heat it encounters, but what 3i Atlas was doing surpassed those numbers so effortlessly that the increase began to resemble not a natural process but a deliberate unveiling, as though something within the visitor had awakened and was casting aside its shroud. The light did not simply brighten in a steady, predictable pulse, it blossomed, blooming outward in expanding layers like ripples spreading across a darkened ocean. As the brightness grew, the glow around the object seemed to stretch, swelling into the surrounding blackness. The impression, to those watching the data unfold, was something like a cosmic lighthouse igniting in the depths of space, a beacon cutting through the solar glare with a clarity no natural comet should be capable of achieving. In the quiet control rooms where scientists monitored their screens, the rising numbers cast a hush across the air, the kind of hush that signals the onset of confusion, the realization that what is happening cannot be explained by the known laws of the universe. Inside one such room at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, a technician was the first to murmur something uncertain as the brightness spike crossed an internal threshold. Moments later, a soft alert chimed through the lab, a gentle tone intended to indicate a telemetry update, though on that day it might as well have been the toll of a distant bell announcing the arrival of something unanticipated. Researchers leaned forward in their chairs. Conversations faded. Hands hovered over keyboards. The readings were clear, unmistakable, and utterly baffling. Never before had a comet-like object changed its brightness with such intensity, such speed, such defiance of thermal logic. There is an energy in moments like these, a subtle charge that fills the air when a room full of experts confront a new phenomenon they have no immediate explanation for. Some stared in stunned silence. Others whispered speculative theories under their breath, each more implausible than the last. Perhaps an enormous outgassing event had occurred, releasing trapped volatile materials from deep beneath the surface. Perhaps the solar wind had struck the object in some unexpected geometric configuration that channeled the reflective dust in just the right way. Perhaps the materials composing 3i Atlas included compounds rarely seen in ordinary comets, compounds that reacted to solar heat with bursts of unexpected luminosity. And yet, beneath the surface of these cautious, rational explanations, another thought simmered, a thought that no one dared to voice aloud in those early moments. Though all felt it stirring, what if this surge of brightness was not a reaction to the sun but an expression of something within the object itself? What if the light was not merely reflected but emitted? What if 3i Atlas, the visitor that had already defied so many expectations, was capable of something that no natural body should be able to produce? For a while, the scientists remained silent, each lost in private contemplation, watching as the flare continued to expand like a celestial breath drawn into the darkness. The glow did not waver, it did not flicker, it did not decline, it held steady, unwavering, as though the object had chosen to reveal itself in a single bright gesture, daring the universe to question what it truly was. This was the moment when the story of Three-Eye Atlas shifted from curiosity to enigma, from scientific puzzle to cosmic riddle, and every researcher watching knew that nothing about this object would be simple from here on. As the brightness began to plateau, a new question emerged, quiet yet urgent, settling into the minds of all who watched. What force could drive such an extraordinary burst of light? What lies beneath the surface of an interstellar traveller that could survive the fury of the sun and then shine with the brilliance of a beacon? What secret has this visitor carried across the gulf between the stars? And perhaps most unsettling of all, what will it do next? Long before the object stunned observers with its extraordinary burst of brightness near the sun, there was another transformation that, in hindsight, should have warned everyone that Three-Eye Atlas would refuse to behave like anything we thought we understood. It began with something subtle, almost unremarkable, a tint upon the reflected light that astronomers noticed during the earliest weeks of observation. When researchers first measured the spectrum of light bouncing off the object, they saw that the light reflecting from its surface was mostly red, and this struck no one as unusual. It was normal for a comet, entirely expected. The kind of result that would make any astronomer nod and continue with their work. The redness of a comet is typically caused by the fine dust and organic molecules released from its surface as it warms. These particles scatter sunlight preferentially toward the red end of the spectrum, lending many comets a soft crimson glow that has been recorded countless times in the history of celestial observation. Were one to look back across the centuries, they would find many examples of comets whose dusty tails painted the night with this faint reddish hue. Ancient observers wrote about such lights with awe, describing them as glowing embers that drifted across the heavens. Even in recent decades, comets like Hale-Bopp and Hyakutake displayed hints of this colour, reminders of the simple physical processes that govern cold, dusty objects when exposed to sunlight. For a while, Three-Eye Atlas fit neatly within this pattern, showing nothing more than the expected signature of a typical comet making its slow inward journey. But then the colour changed. Sometime in the early weeks of September, astronomers watching the object noticed that the spectrum of light had shifted in a way none of them had anticipated. Instead of radiating its soft red reflection, the visitor from interstellar space had turned green. The data was clear, the graphs unmistakable, and yet there was no satisfying explanation waiting to greet the scientists who gathered to interpret the results. The object had turned green in early September, and they still do not know why. The green was not a faint emerald whisper easily dismissed as an instrumental artifact. It was pronounced, distinct, vivid enough that even preliminary processing revealed the transformation with ease. Green in a comet can sometimes be associated with the presence of diatomic carbon, a molecule that fluoresces under solar ultraviolet light and can cast a faint green glow around the nucleus. But even this familiar phenomenon seemed insufficient to account for the degree of colour displayed by Three-Eye Atlas. The green surrounding it did not appear gentle or diffuse. It had the quality of an aurora, the kind of shimmering radiance seen in the polar skies of Earth when charged particles collide with atmospheric gases. Observers described the glow as reminiscent of a vast ribbon of cosmic light, as if the interstellar traveller were wrapped in a mantle of shifting emerald, pulsing faintly with the breath of the solar wind. For many nights, instruments recorded this strange colour with unwavering consistency, and theories multiplied in laboratories and observatories across the world. Some speculated that the object contained rare compounds originating from the depths of another star system. Others suggested that the intense radiation of the approaching solar maximum was exciting unfamiliar materials on its surface. Still others whispered that perhaps some process within the object itself was generating the light, though no one could outline a mechanism that made sense. Even within the privacy of internal discussions, scientists hesitated to suggest anything that strayed too far from established physics. Yet the more the data accumulated, the harder it became to ignore the strangeness of what they were seeing. And then, just as researchers began to settle into the mystery of the green glow, the colour changed again. As Three-Eye Atlas drew closer to the sun, the spectral readings shifted once more. moving not toward the red end of the scale as would be expected from a comet exposed to increasing solar heat, but toward the blue. The visitor had changed colour again from green to blue, and we would typically expect the shift to move toward red. The transformation made no sense. Blue light is energetic, requiring higher frequency emissions and often associated with materials that react intensely to ultraviolet radiation. For a comet, which is ordinarily composed of dust, frozen gases, and organic compounds, a swing toward blue under solar heating is nearly unheard of. The result was a spectacle that left even seasoned astronomers unsettled. The blue hue that enveloped the object was cool and sharp, glowing with a kind of crisp luminescence that brings to mind the icy breath of a distant star, or the luminous glow of ionized gases stirred by magnetic storms. It looked less like a natural outcome of sublimating ice, and more like the controlled emission of something with a purpose or a reaction, unlike those we have catalogued. In images processed by chronographs and telescopes, the object seemed to radiate with an inner frostlight, a blue that resisted the burning heat surrounding it, defying the rising temperatures, refusing to obey the rules. This was the moment when researchers began comparing notes with unease, aware that they were witnessing behaviour without precedent. Red shifting toward green might be explained. Green shifting toward blue under extreme solar exposure stepped beyond the familiar. It was an inversion of the usual thermal response, an inversion of what organic dust or volatile gases should do. It was, in short, a sign that 3I Atlas was not reacting to the sun in the same way as any comet known to humankind. The lingering question hung quietly in every observatory, in every laboratory, in every late-night discussion among astronomers staring at their spectrographs. What material could produce such a shift? What mechanism could drive it? And what could possibly lie beneath the surface of this interstellar wanderer that allows it to change its colours in defiance of natural law? The colour of a celestial body is a language. It tells its story through wavelengths and reflections, through emissions and absorptions, and in the case of 3I Atlas, the story written in colour was not one of familiarity but of mystery. Red to green to blue, a sequence like a coded message, a pattern waiting for someone to understand it. As the days passed and the unusual behaviours of 3I Atlas accumulated into a list too long to dismiss as coincidence, the scientific community found itself circling a triad of explanations, each one imperfect, each one incomplete, and each one offering a glimpse into a different possible nature for the interstellar visitor. These three hypotheses became the pillars of the early investigation, the frameworks upon which astronomers attempted to hang the tangled threads of data that continued to defy ordinary classification. The first was a familiar scientific refuge, the explanation that the object was releasing, in sudden abundance, a massive new cloud of bright blue gas. This interpretation sought comfort in chemistry, in physics, in known materials and predictable reactions. The second hypothesis embraced the destructive nature of the sun, and suggested that the glowing wanderer was experiencing the beginning of a breakup event, cracking under the relentless pressure of radiation and heat, fracturing into smaller pieces that shed light and gas in chaotic plumes. The third and most controversial hypothesis whispered through the corridors of observatories in low voices, a possibility so bold and so fraught with implication that few dared to state it openly, that perhaps the strange changes in brightness and colour had not been provoked by the sun at all, but by something from within the object itself, something that might resemble alien engine technology. Scientists approached the first hypothesis with the comfort of familiarity, because even though the behaviour of 3I Atlas had already broken so many expectations, the idea of an object suddenly releasing a massive plume of exotic gases felt like an explanation rooted firmly in the natural world. Comets, after all, can hide unexpected compounds beneath their crusts, pockets of frozen material that erupt violently when warmed by the sun. It was not unreasonable to imagine that the interstellar traveller, shaped by alien conditions in the void between stars, might contain chemicals rarely observed in local comets. These materials, subjected to the fierce heat of the perihelion, could have released a bright blue gas that expanded outward in great shimmering clouds. To explore this idea, researchers consulted spectral charts, running comparisons against every known luminous gas they could identify. They wondered whether the blue light might be the signature of a rare noble gas, perhaps argon or neon, Though such elements do not easily form the kinds of complex molecules normally found in comets, others consider the possibility of ionized oxygen or emissions from carbon-bearing molecules that can glow blue under intense ultraviolet stimulation. Yet none of these candidates fit comfortably with the magnitude of the brightness that had been observed. A gas cloud could shine, a gas cloud could shift colour, but for the brightness to multiply hundreds of times over in such a brief span of time required a mechanism far more forceful than any natural outgassing event previously recorded. The theory of the blue gas remained possible, but it sagged beneath the weight of its own improbabilities. The second hypothesis invited comparisons with some of the solar system's most famous catastrophic events. Perhaps 3I Atlas was fracturing, entering the beginning of a breakup event, the moment when internal stresses and external heat conspire to split a comet into smaller fragments. Astronomers remembered the tragic splintering of comet Shoemaker-Levy 9, torn into a string of bright pearls before plunging into the atmosphere of Jupiter. They recalled the fragmentation of Comet 73P, which split into dozens of glowing shards that trailed across the sky like the remnants of a shattered lantern. These examples offered a comforting precedent. A comet can break. A comet can crack open like ancient ice under sudden heat. A comet can glow wildly as fresh surfaces are exposed to sunlight. But 3I Atlas confounded this explanation as well. If it were breaking apart, then the chronographs should have revealed multiple luminous cores, irregular flickers, signs of separation. Instead, the interstellar visitor emerged from its perihelion intact, unbroken, seemingly unfazed by the onslaught it had endured. No new fragments trailed behind it. No dissipating cloud betrayed a structural failure. Instead of falling apart, the object seemed energized, transformed, almost awakened by the encounter. The breakup hypothesis failed not because it lacked precedent, but because the object stubbornly refused to behave like one that was dying. It behaved instead like something changing. That left the third hypothesis, the one seldom mentioned aloud, the one that seemed less like a theory and more like a challenge whispered into the vastness of the cosmos. When the data revealed that the object's brightness had not been driven solely by solar energy, but by something originating from within, the idea rose in the minds of researchers unbidden, unwelcome, and yet persistent. The phrase alien engine technology, spoken first in jest, then in fascination, then in uneasy contemplation, found its place among the possibilities, not because anyone wished it to be true, not because the scientific community is eager for sensationalism, but because the object had changed brightness and colour in ways that did not conform to any known natural process, and because the alternative explanations faltered in the face of the evidence. This hypothesis asked a question that carried the weight of both wonder and dread. What if 3I Atlas were not entirely passive? What if the radiant flare, the sudden burst of blue, the shifts in spectrum, and the extraordinary acceleration recorded in later observations were not simply reactions, but actions? What if something within the object could emit energy in ways no natural comet could match? What if the visitor from interstellar space carried a mechanism, a structure, or a process that allowed it to manipulate its own luminosity? To be clear, no one presented this idea as fact. It remained a ghost of speculation, a possibility made of thin whispers. Yet it lingered because it fit a pattern the others could not. It lingered because the brightness surge seemed deliberate. It lingered because the change in colour contradicted thermal logic. It lingered because the behaviour of 3I Atlas resembled something more complex than the chaotic shedding of gas. In the corridors of late-night discussions, scientists spoke cautiously, aware of the dangers of unfounded conclusions, but equally aware of the magnitude of the mystery unfolding before them. They examined the data again and again, searching for flaws, pursuing natural explanations with tenacity and discipline, and yet always returning to the same unsettling truth. 3I Atlas was acting in a way that did not fit comfortably within any known category of celestial body. Sometimes the universe offers us puzzles that defy our assumptions and confront us with the vastness of what we do not yet understand. In the case of 3I Atlas, the puzzle had taken the shape of a wanderer whose behaviour danced between the boundaries of natural science and something more enigmatic, and as the object continued on its journey, the need to understand it only grew stronger, for if its changes in brightness and colour were remarkable, what came next would push the mystery into an entirely new realm. In the days following its explosive surge of brightness and its bewildering shifts in colour, 3i Atlas continued its journey outward from the Sun, drifting through a region where the gravitational pull of the star still held great authority, but no longer dominated all motion. Astronomers watched closely, expecting the visitor from interstellar space to settle into a smooth and predictable arc, a trajectory governed by the same laws that guide the dance of comets, asteroids, and planets alike. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the story might return to the realm of the familiar, but the universe had prepared another surprise, one that would deepen the mystery far beyond any previous twist. As the data streamed in from satellites and observatories across the solar system, scientists detected something that made the room fall unnaturally quiet. The trajectory of 3i Atlas was beginning to shift, drifting subtly at first, then unmistakably, in a way that could not be explained by the gravitational pull of the Sun or the gentle push of the solar wind. The object was demonstrating what researchers refer to, with both precision and caution, as non-gravitational acceleration. It was, in the simplest and most startling sense, moving under its own propulsion. Natural comets sometimes exhibit small degrees of non-gravitational acceleration caused by jets of gas erupting from their surfaces as they warm. These jets can act like tiny thrusters, nudging the comet slightly off its gravitationally predicted course. The effect is usually faint and gentle wobble along the orbital path, but what 3i Atlas was doing bore little resemblance to this natural behaviour. The shift was far too strong, far too coherent, and far too sudden. During the period in which these anomalies were measured, the object changed its direction away from the Sun by a distance scientists estimated to be roughly 135 kilometers, and at the same time, its velocity relative to the Sun increased by an additional 60 kilometers of outward motion. Combined, the object experienced an astonishing 200 kilometers of non-gravitational movement in a single day. Such a magnitude was unprecedented, and it shattered the bounds of ordinary comet physics. Researchers were compelled to revisit the data repeatedly, searching for errors in the instruments, anomalies in the processing software, or distortions caused by the solar environment. Each time the numbers were verified, each time the pattern remained, 3i Atlas was shifting course with an internal consistency, a steady propulsion, the kind of controlled movement that seemed deliberate rather than chaotic. It behaved not like a comet being pushed around by the Sun, but like something steering itself. To help the public understand just how extraordinary this motion was, scientists began explaining it through simple analogies. They described it as if a spacecraft drifting through the void suddenly began to fire small thrusters, altering its path with careful intent. In the vacuum of space, even the gentlest puff of gas can shift an object's trajectory, just as a handheld compressed air canister could slowly push an astronaut across the interior of a space station. But for such a shift to be visible from millions of kilometers away, the force required would have to be immense, sustained, and remarkably coordinated. The comparison inevitably called to mind the previous interstellar visitor that had ignited similar debates. Oumuamua, that elongated traveller, had startled astronomers when it exhibited a small yet measurable non-gravitational acceleration as it slipped out of the solar system. Even then, the anomaly had been tiny, subtle, barely enough to raise a whisper of speculation. Some researchers suggested that it might have been caused by the release of trapped hydrogen ice. Others proposed more exotic ideas, but even at its most dramatic, Oumuamua's acceleration had been gentle, almost shy. 3i Atlas, by contrast, was bold, its motion was unmistakable, its deviation unmistakably large, its magnitude far beyond anything that could be attributed to ordinary jets of sublimating ice. It did not wobble. It did not drift in fits and starts. It flowed, smoothly and continuously, upon a path that seemed to follow no gravitational script at all. In the hours and days that followed, the revelation spread across observatories like a ripple of unease. Theories surged through laboratories, each one carrying the same tension between caution and curiosity. Could the object truly be releasing powerful jets of gas unseen in the coronagraph images? Could its internal structure be harbouring volatile materials capable of exerting such force? Could the heat of the solar maximum have awakened reservoirs of pressure deep within its core, releasing energy in immense and organised plumes? Yet for every explanation offered, a contradiction waited. If such jets existed, why had the object shown no significant wobbling before its approach to the sun? If the sun had ignited some hidden reservoir, why did the release seem so coherent and unidirectional? And if this was a natural process, why did the acceleration persist in a way that mimicked the steady thrust of a controlled system, rather than the irregular sputtering one would expect from chaotic outgassing? Nothing fit neatly. Nothing aligned comfortably with the known behaviors of comets. Nothing settled the matter. In every great mystery, there comes a moment when the familiar rules fall away, and the question that no one wishes to ask becomes impossible to avoid. Scientists found themselves confronting that moment now. They remembered the faint whispers surrounding the possibility of alien engine technology, murmurs first born during discussions about the brightness surge. Those whispers had quieted after the perihelion, drowned out by the pressing need for clear analysis. But now, in the face of this new and undeniable deviation, those whispers returned. Still, responsible researchers refused to leap to conclusions. The universe is vast and full of processes yet undiscovered, and the burden of proof for anything extraordinary is immense. But the data did not lie, and the numbers did not flinch. 3i Atlas was moving in a way that did not rely solely on gravity. Something was pushing it. In the silent hours of night, long after the control rooms emptied, a few scientists stared at residual plots of the object's trajectory, tracing the gentle curvature of its shift. They imagined the forces required to pull such a maneuver. They imagined what kind of object could carry those forces across the cold, empty distances between the stars. And they wondered, quietly, whether the interstellar visitor that now drifted through the solar system was perhaps not a wanderer at all, but a traveller with intention. The days after the unexpected acceleration of 3i Atlas brought with them a new revelation, one so visually striking and so structurally bewildering that even the most reserved scientists found themselves speaking with open disbelief as the object drifted farther from the sun and the fierce glare of the corona eased enough for the coronagraphs to reveal clearer details. Images began arriving that would become some of the most iconic in the entire sequence of observations. The visitor from beyond the stars appeared not as a simple glowing point, nor as the diffused haze of dust expected from a comet recovering from solar assault, but as a luminous core surrounded by a halo of light, from which emerged at least 7 distinct jets of gas, each one stretching outward in long, slender plumes. These jets were unmistakable. They fanned out like the rays of an otherworldly crown, stark against the dark backdrop of space. Some were aimed away from the sun, which would be typical of a natural comet responding to the solar wind, but others, in direct defiance of cometary physics, were shooting directly into the sun. The coronagraph images captured these sunward jets with a clarity that left no room for doubt. Narrow streams of luminous material arched inward, piercing the solar glare as though the object was sending a challenge directly into the heart of the star. Scientists stared at the images in astonishment. Comet tails are usually shaped by the solar wind, stretched outward like banners torn loose and carried away on a relentless stream of charged particles. Dust tails glow softly as sunlight scatters through them. Eon tails shimmer in straighter, sharper lines as electromagnetic forces guide them. But in every natural case observed across centuries, the tails point away from the sun, not toward it. Yet here, drifting in the aftermath of perihelion, 3i Atlas displayed a geometry that felt almost architectural in its precision, as if its jets had decided to ignore the fundamental rules that shape all other cometary bodies. The jets themselves were not vague or blurry. They were sharply defined, narrow, coherent, holding their shape with remarkable stability. Even more astonishing was the fact that the object rotates once every 16 hours, a spin rate that should have smeared the gas emissions into broad, spiraling structures. If the jets had been random bursts of gas erupting from the surface, they would have blurred together into a diffuse tail as the object rotated. But instead, the jets persisted, maintaining their form despite the spin, as if they were being sustained by powerful and steady forces no natural comet possesses. Researchers enlarged the images repeatedly, analysing the angles and brightness of each plume. Some jets curved slightly as they extended, suggesting subtle interaction with the solar wind. Others held firm in perfectly straight lines, defying the environmental pressures entirely. The most perplexing were the sunward jets, luminous and delicate yet strangely forceful, pushing directly against the very wind that should have been blowing them backward. Scientists found themselves describing these structures with terms usually reserved for engineered phenomena rather than natural ones. They spoke of coherence. They spoke of stability. They spoke of symmetry. If the object had been a conventional comet, the expected behavior after a close solar passage would be chaotic outgassing. Gas vents would erupt from random patches of the surface. Dust clouds would swirl away. The rotation would produce irregular, disordered shapes in the emissions. The tails would align naturally with the direction of the solar wind. But nothing about 3i Atlas resembled this. Instead of disorder, there was pattern. Instead of fading into a broad cometary plume, the jets sharpened as they extended outward. Instead of being pushed aside by the sun, some jets moved toward it as if drawn by an invisible intention. This single moment, captured in a handful of images, became one of the most hotly debated datasets among astronomers studying the object. Some argued that the jets might be issuing from deep fissures aligned in just such a way that the rotation of the object had minimal effect on their stability. Others speculated that complex magnetic interactions might be shaping the emissions in unexpected ways. A few suggested that the sunward jets might be illusions created by overlapping light patterns, though repeated measurements quickly disproved this. Each plume had a coherent trajectory, a measurable brightness, and a consistency that defied simple explanations. In late-night discussions, researchers compared the images to diagrams of thruster arrays on spacecraft. Noting with discomfort how similar the geometry appeared, they whispered about the possibility that the jets might not be random at all, but controlled, coordinated, or at the very least driven by a mechanism not yet understood. The thought lingered in the air like a cold draft. It was not a conclusion anyone was ready to accept, but it was a possibility that refused to be dismissed. The existence of 7 distinct jets, each maintaining form despite the rotation and solar pressure, hinted at a complexity beneath the surface of 3i Atlas that no natural body has ever demonstrated. The object was not behaving like a comet awakening. It was behaving like something responding, and as the jets continued to stream outward, carving luminous lines across the solar wind, one question began to take shape in the minds of researchers across the world. If these jets were not the chaotic breath of a melting comet, then what exactly were they? And if they were not shaped by the sun, who or what was shaping them? The mystery deepened, and the story of 3i Atlas only grew stranger. In the aftermath of the revealing images that showed 7 radiant jets streaming from the core of 3i Atlas, astronomers prepared themselves for the possibility that the interstellar visitor might soon settle into more typical cometary behavior. Perhaps, they thought, the object had endured the extremes of the solar encounter and was now ready to disperse into a familiar cloud of dust and gas, forming a long, soft tail that stretched gently behind it. But as had become the pattern in every chapter of this unfolding mystery, Atlas chose instead to do something no one expected. A new series of observations began arriving from the coronagraphs as the object travelled farther from the immediate glare of the sun. The first images appeared blurred, then sharpened, and finally presented a sight that caused experienced researchers to lean closer, eyes narrowing in disbelief. 3i Atlas had grown a tail so immense, so sudden, and so structurally unusual that the data almost seemed like fiction. Extending outward from the bright halo that surrounded the core was a colossal plume of gas and dust, a pale, rippling column that stretched nearly 3 million kilometers into space. The plume did not resemble the classic shape of a comet tail, which usually fans outward in a soft triangular sweep. Instead, it looked like smoke rising from a fire, delicate, shifting, almost ghost-like, a single vast column rather than a broad spray of scattered particles. In the enhanced images, the plume appeared textured, almost layered, as though waves of unseen turbulence had pressed soft ripples into its length. The edges were pale and luminous, blending into the darkness like ink dissolving in water. At the source of the plume, just above the glowing center of Atlas, the material surged upward in a concentrated stream, maintaining its structure in a way that seemed too orderly for a chaotic outburst. It looked alive, as though the object were exhaling a great breath into the void. The length of the plume startled even those accustomed to the grand scales of cosmic structures. To imagine something stretching nearly 3 million kilometers is to imagine a column long enough to reach from the Earth to the Moon several times over. a distance so vast that human intuition struggles to fully grasp it. And yet, there it was, traced clearly in the coronagraph images, a towering ribbon of material that had manifested in less than a day. But as remarkable as the main plume was, the second discovery was even more astounding. On the opposite side of 3i Atlas, stretching back toward the sun rather than away from it, scientists identified a second plume, smaller but still immense in scale, an antitail reaching nearly 1 million kilometers in length. This structure was not faint or accidental. It was a clear, coherent form, shaped in direct opposition to the direction in which all natural comet tails are blown. The term antitail had been used once before in reference to this visitor, months earlier when it was still far beyond the inner solar system, but at that time the behaviour had been weak, puzzling, and largely dismissed as an optical artifact or a minor anomaly caused by dust geometry. Now, however, with the object bathed in the full force of solar radiation, its antitail had not only reappeared but had grown into a massive and clearly defined plume. Astronomers stared at the images, astonished by the implications. A natural comet tail forms when solar wind sweeps dust and gas away from the nucleus, shaping the material into a long arc that trails the object. Even when comets produce multiple tails, whether dust-based or ion-based, the direction is always outward, away from the sun, in obedience to the relentless push of solar radiation. But the antitail of 3i Atlas defied this rule entirely. Instead of being carried away, the plume pressed forward against the solar wind, a luminous spear aimed directly at the source of the force that should have repelled it. This defiance of basic physics created an image so beautiful and so delicate that for a moment researchers forgot the confusion and simply marvelled. The sight evoked poetry more than science. The main plume rising like the smoke of a cosmic bonfire, pale and towering, drifting outward into the empty sea of space. The antitail curving back toward the sun like a luminous ribbon caught in a gentle wind flowing the wrong way, as though it were whispering secrets back to the star itself. Some scientists compared the formation to a pair of celestial wings unfurling above the visitor, one stretching into the darkness, one reaching toward the light. Others described it as a cosmic hourglass frozen in motion. A few, in late-night discussions filled with equal parts wonder and unease, imagined the plumes as signals, threads of light pulled taut between the object and the sun, as though Atlas were exchanging messages with the luminous giant it had just survived. The sheer stability of the structures caused further surprise. Despite the rotation of the object, despite the violent solar environment, despite the chaotic forces that should have torn the plumes apart, both the primary tail and the antitail maintained their form with eerie consistency. They did not fray, they did not disperse, they did not drift into the expected cometary haze. Instead, they stretched across vast distances like two arms extended in opposite directions, each one sculpted by a force that did not seem fully aligned with natural processes. In more speculative circles, whispers rose once again, soft but persistent. Could these plumes be the product of internal pressure systems, mechanisms deeper within the object's core? Could they be manifestations of magnetic fields not yet understood? Could they be something else entirely? No matter the interpretation, the image was unforgettable, a visitor from the distant dark, surrounded by a vast cloud of light, releasing two great streams of material in defiance of every rule known to guide the behaviour of comets. One plume rising like the smoke of creation, the other reaching back toward the blazing heart of the solar system. Two gestures, two mysteries, one object, and in the midst of those luminous shapes, the question grew larger still. What kind of traveller leaves such marks upon its path, and what might it reveal next? As the luminous plumes of 3i Atlas stretched farther into the dark, painting cosmic strokes across millions of kilometres of space, astronomers found themselves turning their attention once more to a question that had lingered since the object's first detection. What was the true size of this visitor? The earlier estimates, which placed its diameter somewhere around 5 kilometres, or perhaps 10 kilometres, had always been spoken with hesitation. Observing the nucleus of a comet-like object is notoriously difficult, because its glowing halo of gas can obscure the core, leaving only a faint silhouette buried within a luminous veil. But the behaviours exhibited by Atlas, from its staggering non-gravitational acceleration to its immense twin plumes, suggested that the interstellar traveler was far more massive and far more resilient than initial measurements had implied. In laboratories and observatories around the world, scientists debated the physical dimensions that could support such extraordinary activity. If the object were on the smaller end of the estimated range, the intense bombardment of the solar maximum should have torn it apart. Ice would have vaporized, dust would have scattered, internal fractures would have been exposed and widened until the structure collapsed entirely. Yet Atlas had not broken. It had endured the solar storm with a tenacity that suggested a strength beyond that of fragile cometary bodies. If the object were closer to 10 kilometers in size, its mass would be sufficient to withstand forces that would obliterate lesser wanderers. Such a diameter would make it 20 times the size of the first known interstellar visitor, Oumuamua, and 10 times larger than Borisov, whose own size already defied expectations. A body of such magnitude moving through interstellar space would require resilience to survive a journey that might span not thousands or millions, but billions of years, for in the immense stretches of the galaxy, where gravitational tides pull and strain, where clouds of dust drift like cosmic sandstorms, where stars are born and die in waves of shock and radiation, any object travelling for such extraordinary lengths of time must endure collisions, erosions, and gravitational disruptions. To imagine 3, Atlas existing long enough to cross the gulf between the stars is to imagine a vessel of stone and ice older than human civilization many thousands of times over. It may have been drifting silently through the darkness when entire species rose and fell on Earth, when continents shifted, when oceans formed, when early life first reached toward the sun. Its journey may have begun before our own star had reached the stable rhythm it now holds. And through all of this, it survived. A small comet might squeak through the void by chance, avoiding catastrophe simply by being too insignificant to attract collision. But a body of the size suggested by Atlas is like a mountain drifting through an ocean of darkness. Its very presence makes avoidance unlikely, and yet here it is, alive, intact, glowing with bewildering energy, and displaying behaviours that seem to parody the fragility we've come to expect from natural celestial wanderers. Astronomers speak quietly about the sheer improbability of such an object arriving at our doorstep. The chance of something this large surviving untouched through the violent tapestry of interstellar spaces, as one researcher murmured, 1 in a million, and the chance of it then passing close enough to our sun to be observed in such detail during a period when humanity has the technology capable of watching its every gesture, feels almost like a cosmic alignment, the kind of coincidence that challenges the boundaries between randomness and meaning. As these discussions took place in dimly lit offices and humming control rooms, a different sort of reflection began to surface among those who had spent their lives studying the stars. The size of 3i Atlas, the unimaginable distance it had crossed, and the sheer impossibility of its survival sparked a wave of contemplation that felt more philosophical than scientific. What does it mean for an object to travel so far, for so long, and to arrive here now? What stories does such a traveller carry locked within its silent core? Is its presence nothing more than an accident of celestial motion, a random crossing of orbits in the vast machinery of the universe? Or is it a reminder of how small and brief human existence truly is, set against the canvas of a cosmos where time stretches not in centuries or millennia, but in epochs that dwarf the human mind? Some scientists admitted quietly, often when the day's work was done and the lights had dimmed, that they felt a strange kinship with the wandering giant. To study 3i Atlas was to witness endurance carved into the shape of a celestial body. It was to see determination without intention, persistence without consciousness, and longevity so profound that it transformed cold rock and ice into something resembling a cosmic relic, a message carried across the ages by the blind hand of physics. Perhaps the most humbling realization came from understanding that we are among the first living creatures to witness this object since its journey began. Countless stars may have passed it by. Countless civilizations, if they exist elsewhere in the galaxy, may never have seen it. And yet humanity, fragile and young upon the cosmic stage, is here to watch it glow, here to observe its mysteries, here to wonder at the impossible endurance of a traveller that has crossed distances beyond comprehension. Size, in the end, is not just a measurement of diameter or mass. It is a measurement of presence, of meaning, of awe. and in every sense that matters, 3i Atlas is vast. As the weeks unfolded and 3i Atlas continued its perplexing journey through the inner solar system, the atmosphere among the scientific community shifted from curiosity to urgency. The object was heading toward a rendezvous that would soon place it closer to Earth than at any point in its long interstellar voyage. And the date circled on every astronomer's calendar was the 19th of December, the moment when the wanderer would reach its closest distance to Earth. It was a moment that many described as the scientific equivalent of witnessing a solar eclipse that happens once in an age, a moment when the object's secrets might finally be revealed, provided humanity could gather and interpret enough data before it slipped away into the outer dark. Across the solar system, spacecraft all over were now watching 3i Atlas with every instrument they could spare. Solar orbiters adjusted their vantage points. Planetary probes scanned with their limited yet valuable instruments. Even missions not designed for deep space observations contributed fragments of data, small pieces of a puzzle that was growing more intricate by the day. Like a network of distant sentinels, these spacecraft formed a dispersed net of eyes and sensors, each one transmitting its own tiny part of the unfolding story back to Earth. And on Earth, in the quiet glow of mission control rooms, the mood changed. At the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the lights hummed softly against the cool metallic surfaces of consoles, and monitors cast pale reflections onto the faces of scientists who had grown accustomed to long hours and restless nights. Some had begun arriving before dawn, others had stopped leaving altogether, choosing instead to doze briefly on office couches before returning to their stations. The hum of air conditioning, the soft tapping of keyboard keys, and the occasional hiss of coffee machines created a rhythm that pulsed beneath the more urgent tempo of the data flowing in from the void. The mission logs began filling with notes that grew increasingly expressive as the strangeness of Atlas continued to escalate. Words like unusual and unexpected gradually gave way to remarkable, extraordinary, and then, finally, unprecedented. Researchers found themselves speaking in tones that wavered between excitement and awe, mixed with the sobering realization that they might be observing something that would reshape their understanding of celestial bodies forever. The process of analyzing the incoming measurements became an intricate dance. Spectral readings arrived from one satellite, magnetic field fluctuations from another, radiation data streamed in from solar observatories, optical imagery came from ground-based telescopes that had begun tracking the object as it brightened against the night sky. Every dataset had to be calibrated, compared, processed, stripped of noise, and examined for anomalies. Teams specializing in different types of data gathered around shared monitors, pointing at graphs that twisted into shapes reminiscent of music scores, each curve a note in an otherworldly composition. In the late hours of the night, when the world outside lay silent and the city lights glowed faintly against the horizon, many of the scientists began to speak openly about their emotional connection to the unfolding phenomenon. There was a sense that they were no longer merely studying an object, but participating in a story far larger than themselves. Some admitted to feeling a tug of wonder each time a new image arrived, revealing yet another detail of the object's luminous halo or the delicate strands of its immense plumes. Others confessed to feeling a quiet shiver at the thought that they were among the few humans alive who could comprehend the magnitude of what they were observing. As the 19th of December drew nearer, the intensity grew. Software tools that had been adequate weeks earlier were no longer fast enough, and so new ones were written in hurried bursts of code. The whiteboards lining the control room walls filled with sketches of plumes, equations describing the behavior of charged particles, and theoretical models of the non-gravitational acceleration. Days blurred into nights and then back into days. The passage of time marked only by the cool glow of the screens and the shifting patterns of sunlight against the floor. They all felt the approach of the moment when the object would pass closest to Earth, as though the cosmos itself were moving toward a long-awaited revelation. This passage would allow telescopes on the ground to see details previously washed out by solar glare. It would allow spectral instruments on orbiting observatories to gather higher-quality data. It would offer the best chance to determine whether the mysterious behaviors of 3i Atlas originated from natural processes or from something more exotic. But beneath the scientific excitement lay something quieter, something more human, a sense of fragility, perhaps, or humility. The scientists were acutely aware that humanity had been given a rare gift, a chance to witness a traveller from beyond the stars not as a distant speck of light, but as a dynamic and living mystery, a presence revealing itself step by step in ways that challenged everything they thought they understood. As the date approached, one researcher scribbled a note in the margin of a data printout, almost as if leaving a message for themselves. It read, simply, "A visitor is coming," and in those few words lay a truth that none of them could ignore. 3i Atlas was not just an object of study, it was a reminder of the vastness beyond Earth, of the deep and ancient roots carved across the galaxy by silent wanderers, and of how small and temporary human life can feel when set against the backdrop of the cosmos. The 19th of December was coming, and with it, perhaps, answers. As the flurry of data, discoveries, and urgent questions reached a crescendo, something subtle began to shift in the way scientists, storytellers, and skywatchers alike perceive the presence of 3i Atlas. For all its turbulence, its surging plumes, its unexpected bursts of light, and its eerie defiance of known celestial rules, there was also a quiet rhythm to its movement, a gentler truth hidden behind the spectacle, and gradually humanity found itself listening to that quieter voice. In the long hours of night, when the observatories continued their steady watch, and the world below lay wrapped in sleep, the interstellar visitor drifted through a darkness that was not hostile but profound. Space, for all its violence near stars and planets, is also a realm of immense stillness, once freed from the immediate pressure of solar winds and magnetic storms. 3i Atlas sailed through a vast and tranquil ocean, a place where motion feels less like travel and more like being carried by the ancient tides of the cosmos. It was within this quiet that the object revealed a different kind of beauty, one that could not be captured in data plots or spectral charts. When the cameras focused on it from a distance, they saw not the chaos of jets or the glare of plumes, but a soft gleam drifting against the black. The stars behind it shone with a cold clarity, their light unbroken by atmosphere, each one a reminder of how enormous and ancient the universe truly is. 3i Atlas moved among them like a solitary lantern carried across an endless field, its glow steady, its presence small yet undeniable within the boundless dark. For the scientists who had spent countless hours bent over their screens, this quieter phase brought with it a rare moment of reflection. They felt the hum of the machinery around them fade into the background, replaced by the awareness that they were witnessing not just a scientific anomaly, but a moment of cosmic intimacy. The visitor from beyond the stars had become, in its silence, a reminder of the humility required to study the universe, of how small each discovery is when set against the canvas of eternity. Many described a sensation difficult to express in technical language, a feeling that rose not from equations but from something deeper. It was the sense of looking at a traveller unburdened by urgency, gliding through the void with the grace of something that has known no home but motion itself. 3i Atlas seemed almost peaceful, as though the storms it had endured near the sun were already fading behind it like distant memories. In that stillness, the object revealed the essence of space itself, a place where time stretches smooth and unbroken, where silence is not absence but fullness. To watch the interstellar visitor in this phase was to remember that the universe, despite its destructive power, holds vast reserves of serenity. There is calm between the bursts of stellar fury. There is quiet between the pulses of radiation. And within that quiet, humanity can regain its sense of scale. Our planet, so vibrant with life, is a fragile island suspended in a darkness that extends far beyond the limits of imagination. And yet, when seen from afar, Earth glows gently, just as Atlas did, a small point of light in the endless sea. Some scientists stepped away from their monitors and walked outside into the cold night air, letting their eyes adjust to the softer darkness of Earth's sky. They searched for the constellations, for the familiar patterns that had guided sailors and storytellers for millennia, and as they breathed the cool air and felt the weight of the moment settle around them, they realized how extraordinary it was to live in a time when an object born in a distant star system could be seen, named, and studied by beings on a small blue world circling a middle-aged star. 3i Atlas, drifting in its newfound calm, had become not just a mystery to solve but a companion to wonder. It reminded those who watch that the universe is as quiet as it is fierce, as gentle as it is violent, and that within that balance lies the strange and beautiful story of everything we know. There comes a moment in every great cosmic story when the noise of discovery fades, and what remains is the soft breath of reflection. As Three-Eye Atlas drifts farther from the sun and farther from our world, the urgency surrounding it begins to dissolve into something quieter, something deeper. The luminous plumes soften, the brilliant colours fade into the dark, and the visitor from beyond the stars begins to return to the state in which it travelled for ages uncounted, a solitary wanderer crossing the silent distances between suns. When astronomers turn their instruments toward it now, they no longer find the wild spectacle of its approach, nor the extraordinary signs that once defied so many expectations. Instead, they see a gentle glow diminishing slowly, like the last ember of a long burning fire. The violent dance near the sun has passed, and what remains is a traveller wrapped once more in calm, gliding through the darkness with the patience of something that has never known haste. It is in this softened state that Three-Eye Atlas speaks most clearly, not through data or theories, but through the quiet language of presence. There is a kind of serenity in watching an object so ancient and so resilient move away from the light. It reminds us that the universe is not only made of cataclysm and brilliance, but also of long silences and soft departures. The story of Atlas is a story of extremes, of mysteries still unresolved, of moments when the rules we believed unshakable bent in ways we could not predict. But as it retreats into the void, its final gesture is gentle. It leaves as it arrived, a faint spark upon a black canvas, a reminder that even the most extraordinary wonders are part of a cosmic rhythm that continues whether or not we are watching. For those who have followed its passing, a quiet understanding begins to settle. Three-Eye Atlas is not simply an object of study, it is a messenger from a realm beyond our reach, carrying with it truths we may never fully decipher, and yet, the very act of witnessing it has changed something in us. It has expanded the shape of our curiosity. It has deepened our sense of humility. It has reminded us that the night sky is not empty, but alive with travellers whose journeys began before our world had taken form. As it drifts toward the outer darkness, the stars around it seem to stretch wider, their cold light weaving a tapestry that feels at once immense and comforting. The vastness of space becomes not a source of fear, but a cradle in which all things eventually find rest. And in that cradle, Three-Eye Atlas moves steadily, its glow becoming softer with each passing day, as though it is being wrapped slowly in the velvet dark. If you listen closely, there is a lesson carried in that fading light. It is the reminder that everything in the universe, no matter how vast or mysterious, is part of a cycle. Stars flare and dim. Planets rise and fall, visitors from distant realms arrive, reveal a fragment of their story, and continue on their way. In the face of such endless motion, human concerns feel smaller, gentler, easier to breathe through. The cosmos does not rush, and neither should we. So as you imagine the interstellar traveller gliding into the deep, allow yourself to drift with it for a moment. Let the enormity of the night soften the edges of your thoughts. Let the silence of the universe settle around you like a warm blanket, and let the steady, patient journey of Three-Eye Atlas remind you that even in the vastness, there is peace. The visitor continues on, farther and farther from the sun, its glow dimming until it becomes only a faint memory against the dark. And in that final image, as it disappears into the endless quiet, the universe whispers its oldest truth. Everything moves, everything changes, everything rests. Three-Eye Atlas fades into the cosmic night, a solitary spark returning to the darkness it has always called home. As our time together comes to a gentle close, I want to thank you for wandering through the quiet universe with me tonight. These moments beneath the stars are never truly about answers, but about remembering how vast and beautiful the unknown can be. If this journey brought you calm or curiosity, I would be grateful if you stayed close, supported the channel, and returned for the next exploration. Until then, rest well, breathe deeply, and let the night carry you softly onward. I will meet you again beneath another sky, in another story, very soon.